So, Sean, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you on. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your patience and you know running me down. I've been kind of all over the place lately.
Yeah, you're a busy man, and a lot of
Yes.
stuff I want to kind of get into with that. But I guess to kind of get started, where did filmmaking and maybe obviously with a focus on horror, when did that all start for you to be like I guess more than just a dream and turn it into a reality?
Well, to be honest, yeah, I was living in Washington D.C., taking a just trying to see what that was going to be like. Get involved. I had these ideas of getting involved at a nonprofit or something, and I ended up literally just walking through an indie film set and ended up meeting the director and just started talking. And yeah, I saw. I had never known that movies could be made not blockbuster movies. I had no idea that indie film even existed, and so just kind of getting together with this little crew in DC, it just blew my mind. Again, I had no idea that you could do low budget movies. I was ignorant to that reality, and so I just dove in head first. Um, yeah, I mean, I think from then on, I was either working in film or trying to work in film. That can always be difficult. Paying the bills. You can't always. So that I have a like if you look at my resume, there's a long list of like we worked that job for like a month. And I'm like, yeah, because then I quit and went and made a movie, and then I got another one for another month or two. And I went and made a movie. Um, so yeah, I would say just right from the start, um, the indie world was my world. I've and even now, I've had a few excursions into larger Hollywood, but I always end up back to my roots.
Prior to that point, was filmmaking, writing, things like that, was that something that was on your mind, or was it just complete coincidence you just happened to come across a film set?
Writing has always been my thing ever since I was a little kid. I always wanted to write novels, and so that's been with me my whole life. But yeah, film really was me just randomly wandering onto a set. When I got back from DC, um, I moved back to Arkansas, and my brother was there, and he was already kind of plugged into this little indie horror crowd in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and so I started doing some PA stuff with him, and yeah, it was. I had at no point in my life had I ever thought, oh, I'm going to make movies. I'd always wanted to write, but I just that this was prior to self-publishing being an option for people. So I had just kind of written all that off, and that's what I was doing in DC, was trying to get a job as a staff writer somewhere just to use that skill. But no, movies just fell into my lap. I had no, I was like 28, no plans for that, and but once it got me all the way, right away.
So for some people, it might frustrate them in a way to hear that like it all kind of happened, I guess, coincidentally to a degree. Now, I do
Mhm.
think obviously, had you not have had passion, skill, talent,
Sure.
tenacity, stuff like that, I don't think it's as simple as just, oh, well, maybe if I just wander onto a film set, I might just somehow. I don't think it's as simple as that. But I guess
Right.
how does one go from that situation to then actively writing and creating projects? Because I feel like those are kind of worlds apart in a way, and
They
maybe
are.
it's lost on a lot of people how difficult that transition is to like quote unquote overnight success that takes maybe
Right.
multiple years.
Yeah. So, well, like I said, my passion had always been writing. I'm a storyteller, but and not to make it depressing, but at that time, there was no avenue for that. And so I had taken that part of myself and sort of hung it on the wall and was like focused on just finding my way through life. And so in a lot of ways, you're right. I was still a storyteller. It was just this rapid, explosive exposure to the medium of film. And I think that's what really locked me in, was that it I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. Like, that's what was great about this indie thing. They were just some people that they pulled a little bit of money together and some gear, and they just went and did it. And at that time, being a writer was all about you get your manuscript, you send your inquiry letters, you get your rejection letters. You're constantly asking for permission to do what you want to do. And here I was surrounded by these rebels who were just like, nah, we're making a movie. That's what we're doing. And that attitude is so pervasive throughout the indie film world. I just picked up on that. And so I started just kind of, I mean, in some ways it is a little irresponsible. It was very much a trial by errors because I was like, I'm just a guy in Arkansas who's done a couple of films as a PA, but now I want to make movies. So I guess that makes me a producer. So I start calling around trying to raise money. I get some money. I hire a writer, I hire a director, because again, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then just over time, you get a handful of films made, and you start picking things up. I was very lucky that my second film, Sugar Creek, I got to work with a director who kind of learned at the feet of Roger Corman. His name was James Cotton, and so when we got together, he was finally able to start taking some of that hillbilly rebel energy and mold that into actual professional, pathways. But yeah, I would say, it was very much a self-starting situation. There was nobody around to tell me no, I couldn't do it, and that I was crazy because again, it's indie film. If you decide you're going to do a thing, you do a thing.
Yeah.
And in that movie, that first movie, Don't Walk in Winterwood, it never got released. It's a piece of shit. But you have to. That was the breakthrough. Realizing you can, if you have enough willpower and charm and friends, you can pull something together and start down that path towards becoming a professional.
How underplayed would you say the skill of being able to network and then maybe I've heard of it so many times from creative people that they say, they have such a passion for storytelling, writing, whatever it might be. And then, when they start to go into initial meetings or Zoom calls, to kind of, I guess, pitch the idea and
Mm.
maybe try and get somebody else involved and financially and things like that. And not realizing how quickly they were like, wow, I didn't really know what to expect, as in you can be as passionate as you like about your project or your work or whatever, but then having to try and sell that to somebody that may have no clue or interest in that particular
Yeah.
genre, but still, I guess, still get them to go, you know what, actually, yeah, this is a good idea.
Yeah. When you're in what I call indie world, when you're in indie world, you very much have to do that yourself. You think about Hollywood, you have, if I'm in Hollywood, I write a script, I give it to my agent goes and they go and do those meetings. And then those agents they get the script signed with producers who then go and do their meetings with the money people. And so there's this whole industry of people whose jobs are to take meetings and do networking. And when you're an indie person, that job is you. And so it is a skill set. And that was a necessary evil that I had to kind of, I think I'm pretty good at it now, but I've had about 20 years. I'm to a point now where I can kind of regularly secure financing, pitch the movie, get everything together. But that takes a while, especially as an indie person, because there isn't this huge network of people who are full-time meeting takers. And that's so when you're on your own, like I am, like a lot of folks are, you, as long as you acknowledge that it is a skill set and it's its own job, then you're good. And just make sure that you take that paycheck for yourself as well when you're working out your budget, because that is a job. And when you get up into the bigger, million and up type movies, you meet people who that is their exclusive job. Is they get those meetings together, they put the script and the money together, and then they take a paycheck and walk away. So it's almost like they cause these movies to exist, but don't really do. They don't really seem to do anything, and yet without them, there is no movie.
Is it difficult to, and I don't want to like sound completely negative about the industry or anything like that, but I've definitely heard some stories behind the scenes from people that, again, maybe out of excitement for, being creative and somebody saying yes to an opportunity, okay, I'm going to give you some of the money, X, Y,
Mhm.
and Z. I've had people tell me like, I wasn't business savvy enough. I didn't think about my own financial stability either. And maybe accepting contracts or accepting little add-ons to
Yeah,
things, and then afterwards realizing, wow, I really got fucked over there. And
yeah,
like,
you gave it away. That's a that unfortunately that's something that you kind of have to win yourself, or you have to. That's some of that streetwise knowledge that you have to get, either yourself or if you're surrounding yourself with good people, eventually you're going to run into those folks who have had that experience. Because it is, even if you're making a movie for $10,000 or $10 million, it's still an intellectual property. It's a piece of digital real estate or cinematic real estate. It is a piece of business, and so just because it's cheap as hell doesn't mean you shouldn't or try to do it right, because you never know when thing I for example, I have a movie out on Tubi right now called Binary Samurai that I made for like maybe 11 grand.
mhm,
uh, but the amount of paperwork and delivery materials that I was required to give in order to get that distribution, if I had approached it sloppy, I wouldn't have had it, and that deal would be dead. So you've got to be thinking about that. So it's not just building your story. You've got to be thinking about release forms, permission slips, just insurance. You got to be thinking about all that stuff. But what I will say is that, in my opinion, now is the absolute best time to be an indie filmmaker because of how upfront all that stuff is now. You can take care of a lot of your tax stuff on websites. You can get, movie insurance is really easy to get now. A lot of the budgeting software is up there. LegalZoom has its own film section. Streamers are, you know, varying levels of indie access. The cameras are so good now. So like this is a great time to be an indie filmmaker. But you've got to start with those business fundamentals for sure. And a lot of us don't have that going into it.
yeah, and I've definitely heard like from several people saying like that, there's obviously unfortunately people out there who notice and kind of, I suppose, take advantage of,
Yeah.
maybe outright purchasing stories or different things and just taking complete control.
Yeah.
With the advent of streamers and things like that, obviously I can imagine that it's a really good thing when you're an indie filmmaker that there is so many options of where your work can live. Do you find that at that level though that there's downsides to that as well? Like I feel like sometimes there's so many projects I've come across from different people that I feel like didn't get a fair shout because their movie just got dumped with 100 other movies on the same week, and you're like,
Yeah.
it's a bit unfortunate.
It is. It is. There's. I was an actor in a movie that a friend of mine wrote and directed. It was like a Little Mermaid sort of remake. Um, and while that was fun, it was a great movie. Had a decent sized budget. We shot in the Caribbean, and it was picked up by Lionsgate. And I can't discuss how much they paid for it, but what I will say is, considering how much they paid for it, I was shocked and disappointed that they did zero marketing for it. They dropped a trailer on YouTube, stuck it on streaming, and that was it. Um, Now I've heard through the grapevine that they're pleased with how it did, but that to me that was a classic example of you could have done something more with that film, but it would have taken some effort. And I think that's what we've lost with a lot of the streamers now is a distribution company. Most of them, even the bigger ones, the prestige ones, they're doing volume dumps, and so they're not creating these fine-tuned marketing campaigns for movies anymore. They're just shoving them out there. And I
Why do
think
you think that is? Do you think that's because, I don't know, fear of like, they might see your work or something and think, oh, we better snap this up now before another company gets it. Let's just like I guess, batch buy any project we feel good about, and then whatever happens, who cares?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that you'll have yeah, it's the Walmart approach. It's the why sell 100 cans when you can sell 1,000 cans? Just they're just I think a lot of those companies, I mean, most of them really, they're banking on that diamond in the rough. And so if they're releasing 100 films every month, why spend the money on marketing? Because we don't know which one's going to pop and which one isn't, but we know that one is going to pop. So for them, the money is there. It's the individual filmmaker that kind of gets left in the dust there. Because if you're one of those 100 films, well, the distribution company didn't support you. They didn't market your product because they don't have to. They know that one of them is going to be a runaway success just by word of mouth. And
Yeah.
so, but at the same time, I think as long as you know going into it that you're going to have to do your own marketing, and if you can get your distribution deal to kind of reflect that extra effort on your part, I think that's the way to go. There's a hundred different ways to get to that. Whether you're winning awards at film festivals, or if you're, you right before you make the deal, you're like, hey, I'm going to show you, here's my budget. We're going to be going to all these cons. We're going to be selling Blu-rays, so I think filmmakers also have to take some responsibility for that. Like I said earlier, in Hollywood, there's a huge engine, just as many people taking meetings for financing the movie. One of my jobs in my early days was as a sales guy. I worked for Maximedia and Brain Damage Films in Phoenix. I mean, and that one was wild because they're releasing 4 films every month. Most of them are just basement horror movies, but I love that stuff, so it was
Yeah.
fun. But we didn't really do a lot of marketing for it. We were more concerned with throwing new titles at the buyers, and so we were making our sales because they were like, oh, it's a new movie. So we'll buy 1,000 or 2,000 copies because it's a new movie. So there wasn't really much of incentive for us to market because, well, we're going to have another 4 movies next month too, and another 4 after that. And that's how a lot of the streamers are. And then when I worked for Quantum Releasing, I did international sales. So like, you travel around to the markets and you sell licenses to different countries. And the companies would always do okay, but it's because we go there with a big catalog. So I might have, again, I've got that catalog of 100 films. I sell one film for $100,000 to the UK. That's great for that one producer, but all the other producers, they kind of missed out because at the end of the day, I'm just going to that guy being like, what do you want? So you're not tailoring your sales plan specific to that movie. And I think knowing that and knowing that that's how all those companies work, we as independent filmmakers just have to pick up that slack. There's really no other way around it.
Do you think then that's why we're seeing things now that maybe, especially within the horror community, it's kind of going back to more grassroots? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll use Terrifier as an example, that
Oh yeah.
how they were able to kind of transition from anthology short to feature, but like pretty low budget, to kind of jump up another bit. But they done a lot of the work, I guess, themselves, and like interacted with the community and got like, different influencers, podcasters, all that stuff. Like they were doing so many interviews off their own back.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of gotten, obviously I know it's gotten to that next level now, and they've made millions and millions of dollars off the back of the latest one. But is that kind of the key, I guess, then for you guys, is you really have to get into like the nitty gritty, and like you said, even things like Blu-rays and stuff. I feel like the horror community is still a physical media community for the most
Yeah.
part. Like we get behind things. We want the Blu-ray, we want the signed, photograph. We want the mask.
Yeah.
We want the T-shirt. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We want to know. We want to know the filmmakers. We want to see the people. I think it's also, Terrifier is a great example. I like Charlie Steeds. He's an indie film director. He's got a lot of stuff out now. What is great about those, and Terrifier is the alpha example, is Damien Leone. He didn't just make Terrifier and then immediately go do something else just to keep the paychecks going. He made Terrifier and then he was like, no, Terrifier is special. I'm going to pour all of my time and attention and energy into this story. And so when the second one came out, he stayed with that one. Then the third, so now he's reaping the benefits of the third one, um, where you have a lot of people, and I've done it myself, where you got in there, you produced and directed, and you wrote a movie, and that's great, but you kind of forget about it because it's in post, because you need to go get paid to do the next one. And so individual filmmakers can treat their own movies like pieces of content, or like not valueless content, but we can trick ourselves into being volume creators as well. And so I think it is, like if I'm a grip on a movie, I'm not really going to think about that movie after I'm done making it. I'm going to go grip the next movie and the next movie. So there's a disconnect between like the gig based mentality and creating this piece. I hesitate to say content, but this piece of cinema. So at some point, somebody, ideally it's the director or the producer, is taking that piece of cinema, and they're not thinking about the next job. They're thinking about, how do I get this one in front of as many people? How do I make money with this one? So I think in a lot of ways it's a question of priority and focus. And Terrifier is a fantastic example of what happens when you just zero in.
Do you find from a professional standpoint, and maybe this is just something that I'm noticing as like an audience member, but remember years ago when they would bring out movies on DVD and Blu-ray and you would have special features, and I feel like there was an era there where nobody really cared about that. And now
Yeah,
I feel it's kind of come full circle again, where now people are looking for that stuff. And like I've seen so many people even online, ask about like how is there a way that we can, okay, maybe I don't like to collect physical media, but how can I get access to, the director commentary online without having to purchase a Blu-ray? Do you think there's something to that? And have you noticed that maybe the audience are more receptive to, like you said, finding out about the person behind the camera, the person behind the story?
yeah, I think you're spot on. I think, I mean, that's something we're doing for the Hoodoos movie I did last year, and the Western we're about to do. Is we've collected all this behind the scenes stuff, all these photos, little interviews, little videos, working with barbed wire, whatever, Um, and once those movies come out, we're going to start releasing that stuff on our social media platforms, so that if you get the Blu-ray, you'll be able to have all that stuff. But if you're buying a Blu-ray, it's because you want the physical media. And so I don't think that the special features should be exclusive to the physical media. I want people to be able to go, I'd like to hear the director talk out of his ass for an hour while we watch this movie. There it is on YouTube. There it is on X, Rumble, or wherever. Because I think people they do like peeking behind the curtain. And for better or worse, our whole industry has been very, very much exposed. The man behind the curtain, there is no curtain. You just see the man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think it's kind of magical that even though we now see how the sausage is made, people still they want that.
Yeah.
They want to see the nitty gritty stuff. And I'm elated that hasn't reduced anyone's interest. It's actually made it more. People they want to see the magic trick. Then they want to know how the magic trick is made. But knowing how it's made doesn't take anything away from the magic trick. And that seems so counterintuitive to that veil of secrecy that was present, at least when I started in the film industry. You wanted that mystique of like, oh, they're making a movie. It's all very closed doors. And now it's like, no, throw the doors open. Let them see how the sausage gets made. That's what they
Yeah.
want.
It's funny because I even have friends who are not really like involved in anything like that. We'll go to the theater, watch movies, things like that. And now
Mhm.
I find that even they're like, they go see a movie and instantly we walk outside and it's like they're on their phones, like, I want to find out about like the director or how the writer came up with that idea or how
Yeah.
this was put together. And I'm starting to notice that more and more of people who I would consider like just your mainstream audience who just
Yeah.
enjoy movies are now also really interested in like, well, I want to know a bit more about that and why. You mentioned something there that I haven't heard anybody mention at all recently, and it just kind of it got me thinking. You mentioned Rumble, and
Mhm.
not specifically. This is not specifically just targeted towards you saying Rumble, but it obviously lets me know that you have your finger on the pulse to a degree. Is that something that you have to constantly do? As
Yes.
in, see, what else is out there. It can't just be like you said, before it would have been okay, well, it's going to go to Blockbuster, and then when it's finished in Blockbuster, it's going to go to Walmart or whatever, it's going to go to
Right.
Netflix, and then it goes to the free streamers and blah blah blah. You mentioning that though makes me think that obviously you kind of keep an eye on where is relevant and how trends change.
I think it's important to do that. I kind of picked up that mentality when I worked for a company called Hanover House. And that was when I was in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and they were a DVD vendor to Walmart. And part of their business model was, they had a lot of new release movies, but they would go find other movies that had had their day in the sun, but then they'd relicense them, repackage them, redo all their art, and get them out there and present them like they were new, for the $10 bins or whatever. And the guy's philosophy, the guy that owned the company, his whole thing was, these are like pieces of real estate. These are houses. This is land, storytelling land, as it were, and you can always be doing something with it. You can always find a new life for it. I remember at that time, the Boondock Saints movie was kind of going through that little blacklist, scenario, and the company that was trying to sell it reached out to us, and ultimately our company passed on it because they didn't want to make the big man mad. But when that came across my desk, I was like, there you go. There's Boondock Saints, this little cult movie that I so love. And, it has a chance to now get a whole new life on DVD with Walmart. And so I think I've taken that and I've carried it with me into the streaming world. I work with a company called All Channel Films. They're my favorite. They're my favorite. They're a great company for indies. And I've worked with them for a long time. And kind of the arrangement that we have is if they find a new streamer, they're always looking for new platforms. And so if they find a new platform and they're not sure about it, they're like, well, there's a short list of producers they'll call where they're like, hey, we found a new opportunity. We want to send some stormtroopers through the gate. Can we throw your movies out there? It might work, it might not. I'm always just like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you have to constantly be looking for it. Like I remember years ago when they were like, hey, there's this thing called Tubi. We're not really sure about it. Do you want to put your movies up there? Like we're one of the first ones kind of get in there. But we don't know if it's going to be anything or not. I'm just like, yes, let's do it. And now Tubi's like one of our little golden geese. And so Rumble is a great example. That's it's a great alternative to YouTube, or to me, it's a supplement. So you've got to always be looking for ways to keep your movies out there and keep them fresh. Most of the movies that I own my own distribution on, I've made, upwards of a decade or more ago, but I still get those mailbox checks because I don't treat them like they're old movies. I poured my heart and soul into them. I still want people to see them. So even though it's not a new release to me, someone who hasn't seen it before, it's a new release to them. There's always going to be a new audience. There's always going to be a new way to get your films out there. And I think the days of being able to just sign a license agreement with a distributor, hand them your movie, and then walk away and go focus on other things while they go make money, I think that time is over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in a good way. We're
Yeah.
storytellers are taking much more active participation in how their stories are presented.
Yeah, yeah, which I guess can only be a good thing in a way. Do you find as well then that ties into like I feel like social media can be quite fickle and toxic at times, and
Oh, sure.
and sometimes it can be very bad. Like I feel like a lot of influencers, a lot of content creators out there will jump on like the movie bandwagon and just use it to like uh, there's particular ones, and I'm sure people will know anyway, even from me referencing this. There's certain names that seem to have the same opinion of every single movie, and it's
Right.
obviously a negative one because I think that's the one that kind of sells online, is to have that like
Mhm.
funny negative, like let me just shit on everything. But do you find that it works the other way sometimes as well? Like the amount of times I've seen uh old horror movies, or not even old, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I guess, get rediscovered and get this whole new audience. Like I'll see things on TikTok, for example, some influencer will be like, "Oh, I saw this scary found footage movie that came out in like 2012." And all of a sudden, it has 1.3 million likes and there's like 10,000 comments of people going
Yeah,
like, "Oh, I need to check it out."
I love that, and I think that's only going to get more. Um, as with anything, there's going to be more kind of the branded stuff at the top. Everything's going to get stratified. That's always how it is. But I always find inspiration, and you can see that, like Joe Bob on Shutter. He'll come up with a movie that nobody ever heard of that had its moment in the sun in the '70s, and he's unearthing it and giving it this new life. Or companies like Vinegar Syndrome, they're digging up all this stuff because these movies are still great. It happened to myself. I signed Ember Days, my film Ember Days, with Riff Tracks, and they tore it apart like it deserved to be, but it's all in good fun, and it gives that movie this whole new life. And so I think for every kind of I don't want to say sellout, but for every big box influencer, there is going to be that TikToker who's like, oh, let me tell you about this movie from 1972 that three people saw, and it gets this new life. That's I mean, I was speaking with my son yesterday. It was kind of blowing his mind about how old Bram Stoker's Dracula is, and how old Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is,
Yeah.
and how there are new people reading that book for the first time every day. And there's no, Hollywood trained us to not remember that that's how movies are too. But that is how movies are. And all of this technology has now made that even more pronounced. Um, it's like the
Uh,
opposite of the blockbuster effect. When they would,
yeah.
you have shelf space for 10 movies, and now it's one movie that takes up almost all the shelf space and like one or two copies of the others. Well, that time is over.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see that. As regards your creative process then, do you actively sit down to write a movie, or is it a more organic thing? Like, I don't know how I'm trying to structure the question. Do you set yourself out like a guideline of, okay, I need to write this specific project, or does it all just kind of happen naturally? If you're out for coffee, you're taking a walk, you're with friends,
Yeah,
whatever.
for truly, I mean, there's two ways. The most frequent way for me is, like you said, it's very organic. Like I'll have a dream, and by the time I write down the dream, I've forgotten half of it, but the part I remembered was cool, and then I fill in that other part. Or I'll have a scene idea, and I'll write that scene, and then I'll try to figure out, well, why is that happening? What happened before that? What happened after that? A lot of times I'll see art out in the world or online. And I'll be like, oh my god, a SEAL team commando with antlers tied to his helmet. What's that about? I'm going to make that story. Uh, that happened to me a couple of days ago. Now I didn't. I'm not doing anything with that right now, but that's what happened. I just saw that picture and had to write something down. So a lot of times that's why a lot of my movies kind of feel a little mishmashy. It's because I'm having moments of inspiration that are all disconnected, and then I'm shoving them all together and finding a way to kind of knit the quilt. And then when I do commission work, or if I'm working with producers, because after I did Jeepers Creepers Reborn, I kind of had a little heat, and so I was able to get jobs with producers who were like, "Okay, we want a horror movie. Give us come up with something." Um, and so when I would do that, it's a little bit less organic and a little bit more like, what has the producer done before? What are they looking for? What distributor are they going for? What kind of talent are they looking for? Um, and so it's much more jobby job, but it's still fun.
Yeah. Do you find it hard then to, I suppose, switch off that creative brain? Like over the last few minutes we've talked about, and obviously it's not like it used to be. Like you said, you can't just technically you can't just be a writer, you can't just be a
Right.
director in nowadays. You've kind of got to be a mixture of nearly everything. So
Yeah.
does that make it more difficult then, I guess, to switch off? Like I feel this at a way lower level. there's times where like like yesterday, for example, was a Sunday, and I was like, okay, let me just do absolutely nothing. Not going to look at emails. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to go on social media. I'm not going to check stuff. And it's always related to, you know, movies and horror and things like that. But I'm still like, no, let me just for a day completely. And I don't know. I find I can't do it. It's like this thing that's just there all the time. It's like well, it would only take 5 minutes to check emails. It would only take 10 minutes to like look on Instagram and see what people are doing or if there's any news or announcements. Do you find that as well?
It is. It's I I kind of have to I forgive myself for it. Like if I decide I'm going to take a day off, inevitably it'll be like that. Like I'll just be there. I'll be playing a video game, or I mean, video games really. That's kind of how I relax. You can kind of turn your mind off and blow things up. But more often than not, I something will happen and I'll hit the pause button and I'll be over there writing something down. Um, and I used to beat myself up for that, but I've kind of accepted that, like, well, that's just who I am. That's how I do it. Because I've been rewarded plenty of times where, oh, you remember that idea that I had on the day I was supposed to be not working? Well, that's what became this movie. Uh,
Yeah.
and so when the inspiration is coming, I just I go with it. And I tend to find that things balance out. There's when you're self-employed, there's this pressure. If you're not working, you're not getting paid. And not to be all hippy dippy, but I think at some point self-care is important, and you have to give yourself those breaks. Creativity is like breathing. You have to breathe out and breathe in. But inspiration is organic, and so when it comes, you gotta ride that wave. And
I just
for I
I
think creators like us, that wave is pretty constant.
yeah, yeah. And would you find then to follow on from that, does that I don't know at times spill into your personal life, like without getting too into it, but I feel like so many times I've talked to people and myself included, um, relationships, family, kids, friends, things like that. I don't know when I look back and I've spoken to other people and they kind of say, yeah, like there has been times where it's maybe I don't want to say gotten unhealthy, but it starts to affect other
Mhm.
aspects of your life. You're trying to juggle all these things and keep all these plates spinning, keep everybody happy, keep yourself happy, not feel burnt out.
Yeah.
Do you find that's the case now, or maybe it was something you dealt with and you kind of learned to?
Yeah. I mean, it is a definite reality. When I first started, I mean, when your mind is like that, and money is flowing and everybody's happy, it's easy. Or not easy, but it's easier. It's easier to have a family,
Yeah,
easier to have people in your life, because that kind of frenetic, crazy, creative thing you have, the people in your life can see it rewarding you. But when you are struggling, they are not capable of perceiving all the little victories that you have when you're like, oh, I wrote the shit out of that paragraph.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
you feel that, and that's good for you, and that keeps you going, but they don't see that. So unfortunately, when financial times are tough, when jobs are thin on the ground, or you're laboring really hard to get product out that maybe took a 20% quality hit because you had to deal with some other stuff in post, the people that love you, that are around you, they only see you getting your ass kicked, and they start to wonder, like, what are you doing? Why are you just getting that your ass kicked all the time for no reward? Like, it would be fine if I was a defense contractor for about 8 years. I quit the film industry and became a defense contractor because my son was born. I was like, all right, it's time to make money. And I kept writing during that time, but even during that time, I would have to leave for like 3 months at a time. So that was a little hard on the family, but that hardness is made up for by the piles of cash that come home. And that is not always the case when you're doing indie film, where you're like, well, now I'm going to go here for 2 weeks of prep, 3 weeks of shoot, and a week of wrap. But sometimes that rate isn't sufficient to like. Sometimes other people on the outside might be like, really, that's like, you could make that working at McDonald's, but come home every night. So there is, unfortunately, in my experience, financial stability is pretty directly tied with how healthy things can be. Um, and that, that I feel like that's just the struggle of creative people. It gets easier the more successful you are, but you also, I think, have to set some ground rules for yourself and just be like, hey, look, I do this with my kids now because they're getting older. So it's like when it's kid time, it's kid time. Like I don't care who it is, I don't care who it is on the phone. If it's during kid time, I'm not calling you back. And you have to draw those lines. And I'm sure I've lost jobs as a result of leaving a producer hanging. But you have to build those boundaries for yourself so that you can have that life, and ultimately you get rewarded for it because when things are great at home, you've got that creative fire. We don't all have to be miserable, tortured artists. Like I used to be that. I'm not into that anymore. Like I don't want to be a tortured artist.
Do you think then that that's what separates the people who really love it from, because I feel like definitely in more recent times to be a writer, movie director, things like that, a producer has become like a quote unquote like cool thing that maybe younger people see on TikTok or Instagram or somewhere and go, "Oh yeah, I want to make movies. I want to, be brought around in a limousine." And for majority, like the other 99% of the industry, that's not the reality. Like you just said, the amount of people I've spoken to that I would have considered like, oh, financially set, never has to worry, doesn't have to worry about mortgage or anything like that. And then they're like, no, that's like
That's
couldn't be
not the
farther from the truth.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, we go to Sitges Film Festival and it looks great. We have 2 days have been treated like royalty. And then, you know, 2 days later, I'm sitting on the train station. It's raining. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody
yep,
cares. And it's that thing of the difference between the two. But would you say that that's what I guess separates who sticks with it is that
yeah,
actual
because
desire?
anybody can do just about anything for money. You give me enough money, I'll do just about anything for a job. Um, and I'm not saying it's a badge of honor when you keep doing it when you aren't making much, but what I will say is that it's what I was saying earlier about the little victories. So if you have enough of those little victories, that to me that's the stuff that keeps you going. So it's like, yeah, I'm on that train platform and it's raining and nobody knows who I am, but I'm a happy person. I'm not a miserable person. I'm doing the things that I want to do, and especially knowing what I do about the business, I know that even after I'm dead, there's going to be a Joe Bob unearthing my movie 40 years from now. And the way that things are going now, we get seen as filmmakers more than we used to. So people dig into the lives of those people, and so I think we're the creators who stay in it through the hard times. I think they're the ones who are just getting something out of it more than money. Um, Even though I wouldn't necessarily, I know plenty of people who started in the business when I did who have quit and gone on to do other things and are perfectly happy. They made their one movie and that was their moment and they moved on. And more power to those people because those movies are still cool. There are some
Yeah.
people. There are some people who have no interest in doing other things. Yeah, I've tried a lot of different careers. I've had other careers. I keep coming back to this one.
It's that thing as well, and I mention it so many times, and I know some people might cringe at the word when I mention things like legacy, but that's what it is for me. And it's part of the reason why I started to want to have conversations like this. And a lot from I guess a selfish standpoint as well. I care about these conversations I'm having. I'm interested in
Mhm.
these conversations, and not just for the sake of, oh well, who's interesting this week on TikTok? Let me try and like get on, their agent and see
Right.
can I talk to them. Um, and it's that idea of like that legacy that's left behind. Like, I mean, I have a massive bookcase on the other side of the room that is just full of movies. And I'm sure that there's plenty of movies there that I love from filmmakers who are long dead and buried. But it's like that thing still exists that
Yeah.
can never be like erased. That feeling it might give me or somebody else maybe who's having a hard time and it's their little escape. It becomes their comfort movie, whatever it might be. Um, and that's for me, I guess obviously look, it's great to be financially stable and be able to make a living out of it also, but I think that's probably like what you just said. It's that next
Yeah,
step up from it's not just about that thing of money.
yeah. It's to me, legacy. That's not cringy at all. That's not narcissistic or hubris. It's what humans want. You know, I think humans crave legacy, and storytellers perhaps. I don't know that we're necessarily more tapped into that, but for better or worse, storytellers who have permanent mediums like books or movies or music, you know, we have that we are. It's pretty cool that our legacy gets to be there in, you know, surround sound with lots of colors, and I like that. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
I've done other jobs where I've taken, you know, I take pride in the fact that that house exists because I put a, you know, I helped build it. Um, so I think their legacy is there for everybody. It's just ours is a whole lot more garish and in your face.
Yeah.
You don't have to dig. You know, you can find the legacy of Sir Anthony Hopkins is everywhere. You know, you don't. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright is an architect that you can recognize, but there are plenty of other architects who have all these other buildings up that we don't know about. So I guess for storytellers, it is who we are is a little bit more wrapped up in what we create. Um, than maybe other professions, which I think is why legacy for us is a little bit more at the front or a little more readily available.
Obviously, you've created and continue to create a lot of original ideas, original concepts, and stories. So, I'm sure a lot of people will know your name. Um, more of the, I guess, casual audience will know your name through being connected with Jeepers Creepers.
Right.
How did that come about, that progression through, like, indie filmmaking to then obviously a lot of people, you know, in and outside of the horror community would see Jeepers Creepers as one of those, like, staple IPs. So how does that come about? Is that something that you actively wrote a story off your own back and pitched it, or did somebody contact you and say, like, "Look, we want to bring this back"?
Yeah, that was a really messy play. It was so I wrote a book when I was a contractor called Necrospace, and it got picked up by a friend of mine who was a producer, and ultimately we ended up making a 6 episode TV series called Salvage Marines. And while we were on the set of Salvage Marines in Louisiana, one of the producers owned this like film studio that we were shooting at, and they had done Jeepers Creepers 3 there. And I, you know, of course, I met him in the context of I'm the writer for this Space Marines show, or one of the two writers with Raphael Jordan. And when I found out he was doing Jeepers Creepers Reborn, I was just very blunt with him. I was just like, "Hey, I'm a kind of a crazy fan of this IP, and you know, I would love to get this out of the hands of the guy who made it and get this, you know, this IP ought to be separated from the guy who made it. It would be great to do this." And I hounded that dude for like 6 weeks. Like I brought it up basically every day we were shooting Salvage Marines. I would be like, "Hey, so Jeepers Creepers, what are we doing?" And eventually, I think halfway because I think I did good work. I think also maybe just to get me to leave him alone, he was like, "Okay, okay, here's what we want." And it was the weirdest. It was my first commission job where basically they just handed me like a piece of paper that had like 10 or 11 bullet points on it. They were like, "We want the movie to have all these things. Find a way to make all this make sense." Um, and then, yeah, we did maybe 10 drafts or so. Uh, and then passed that over to Timo, you know, who did his director's pass. So the script that made it to the screen is not 100% what I wrote, but it's enough of what I wrote that I take it.
Was there, like, obviously you said, you're a big fan, much like myself, of that character and of that story. Even though you wanted to be involved, was there ever a fear? We don't have to get too into, I'm sure everybody knows
Sure.
the backstory of, what you're talking about there, but was there ever then a fear of, like, okay, we're getting involved in this and everybody continually ties it to, I get exactly what you mean. It's like we need to separate that particular artist or whatever
Yeah,
from the art, but then it's like, there's a lot of people out there who still probably will draw
Sure.
those lines?
Uh, for me at that time, like I said, I was an indie guy, and Salvage Marines was my first big project, even though in the grand scheme it's pretty small. Um, but I basically I was like, look, I don't have a career to lose. I'm so far on the outer edges of fringe indie film. I don't have an agent who's going to drop me. I don't have a studio deal that's in danger. So I really didn't see myself as having anything to lose. And you know, I'm a pretty resilient person when it comes to dealing with negative media, and I'd had some experience doing that before. So yeah, for me, it was just like I'm having so much fun getting to be part of, like you said, legacy, getting to be part of the Jeepers Creepers thing. That I was just like, yeah, I wasn't worried about it. I didn't feel like I had anything to lose.
Is there other IPs out there that you like would have in your head? Is it something that you would do again? Would you like to,
Oh
I
yeah,
suppose, dabble in
yeah.
existing IPs? And is there particular ones that like, I don't know, spring to mind?
I like remakes when they're done right. And I know it sounds a little obscure, but I would actually love to make another Trancers movie. I
That's
think
like a
Trancers is amazing. Um, so yeah, I would say like that one I like. But really any of that IP, I love trying to. I like the challenge of trying to pay appropriate honor to the thing you're remaking, but you're trying to kind of do your own thing. And I think it's really hard to please existing fans and make a remake, and put your own creative spin on it, because so often updating it for modern audiences, or rewriting it for this or that, you never know what the studios are going to want you to do. But to me, just as a writer, that's all just like a lovely challenge. So I mean, really any of them, any of the big horror IPs I got a shot at, it'd be fun. It's a great challenge. It's a way to respect the original material, and this neat challenge of writing inside a box that you're having to build at the same time.
Are you a subscriber to the saying, and I've heard it a few times from a few different people, and I think I've heard varying opinions on the sentiment of this, the idea of one for me, one for the studio, if you know what I mean, as in the sense of like
Mm.
sometimes maybe I have to take on this project to allow me to get to my next thing that I'm really excited about.
Um, I don't think I've experienced that yet. I'm usually so grateful for work. But even Jeepers Creepers is a good example. A lot of the stuff that they wanted me to do in that movie, I didn't agree with, or I wasn't 100% sure it was going to work. And so it's not the script I would have written if I had just been given carte blanche to redo Jeepers Creepers.
Yes.
But even within those, so one might call it selling out. That I was like, I'm not. You gave me this list of 12 things. I only think 3 of them are good. But I still took the job and still went on the journey, because I do love the craft so much, and it is a good paycheck, and it's still fun. And I think that's the thing. So yes, there is. If I was in a do one for me, one for the studio, I don't know that would apply to me, because getting those complicated sets of instructions, those weird things that I would never write on my own, well, that's just a cool challenge. I'm a horror guy, but if somebody hired me to write a romantic comedy, I would take that in a heartbeat, because that's a fun challenge. So yeah, I think when you love it this much, I don't think you can really sell out.
Yeah, it makes sense. No, it's just I've heard that, and I'm always curious to hear different people's perspective, I guess, on that. Is there I guess, living, dead, past, present creator, director, writer, actor, whoever it might be, that you would love to work with?
Uh, I pronounce his name wrong every time, even though I try, but it's Timur Tebmenkov. He did Night Watch, Day Watch, and Wanted. He's a Russian filmmaker. and I love his aesthetic. You know, he adapted some pretty popular Russian vampire novels into these two movies, and what I really liked about him is he was able to kind of bridge sort of that Russian cultural filmmaking and get it over and make something that Americans would enjoy. That's why I think Daywatch is so cool. But because those films, I was watching those around the time I started as a filmmaker, and those films have always stuck with me. Um, and I got to work for a guy on Salvage Marines who had been a camera operator for Timor. So I was like, all right, I'm one step closer.
When it comes to indie filmmaking, and especially within horror, what would you say is key to do you ever think about it outside of the, I guess, the creative aspect? I heard someone reference like they always feel like they have to keep in mind when they're writing a story or coming up with a character or whatever that like, okay, at a certain point, I'm gonna have to look at this from the perspective of, is this somewhat commercial? Do I have certain things inside of this story or this world that if I show it to somebody who maybe is outside of the genre, but maybe they're financially there or whatever, that they'll get it and go, okay, yeah, well, you've got this beat and you've got that cool character, and you've got something we can work with for maybe posters and marketing and things like that.
I think I've done so many of those jobs in the past that I think, for better or worse, I hope better. I've incorporated a lot of that into my own writing. So because I've been a gig guy on different productions. I've done so much production work, so much sales, so much marketing, as well as directing, producing, acting, stunts. I've done all of it to some degree or another. So I do think about that stuff when I'm writing. Um, the only times when I turn that off is if I'm being specifically told budget is no option, is no object. And that will change my writing style a little bit, because then I'll be like, oh well, of course we're going to blow everything up now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think I've got enough of that incorporated into my writing style that I don't really have to think about it too much.
Do you have any comfort horror movies or movies that you find yourself revisiting more often than others? I don't like asking for favorites because I feel like that's quite a difficult question. So it doesn't even have to be favorites, but
Right,
maybe
comfort.
yeah.
The, like movies that I will, yeah. If you just want to like, it's like a cup of hot chocolate or something. You just want to like chill. I often will go back to Brotherhood of the Wolf,
Oh wow.
because it's my favorite movie of all time. Um, I never get tired of it. So I could just watch it over and over and over. But that one and Tremors, of all things, like Tremors, like that's an easy watch. You're like, I'm just going to sit down and have a sandwich and watch Tremors. Um, you just never get tired of it. I think everybody's got those, and those are important to have. Where you're just like, it doesn't matter that scene, Denzel Washington with the cigarette at the end of Fallen. I know it's coming, but I'm always so just like jazzed up when that moment hits in that movie. Um, yeah, and I think everybody's got those where you're just like a couple of films where I could watch it 1,000 times and never get tired of it.
More recently, I've been thinking about that more and more, the idea of comfort movies and stuff like that. And I remember when I first started doing this and I would ask somebody about something like that. And I could tell that they were um not offended by the question, but offended more maybe by the idea of like, well, what do you mean by comfort movie? Like it's a bad movie that I like, or and I think now it's kind of come around to I would say I think if I was a filmmaker, I would rather my movies be considered a comfort movie for people than maybe, it wins a ton of awards, everyone talks about it for 2 months, and then that's it then. It doesn't
Yeah,
have a life after that, it just
yeah,
disappears. The amount of horror movies, like, that I adore and love, and a lot of people would class them as like, "Well, that's not a good movie," or whatever, but there's a cult following behind it.
yeah.
I would nearly rather that, I think, as a filmmaker.
Same, same. If someone was like, "All right, Sean, would you rather be the guy that made Apocalypse Now or Predator?" I would say Predator, because it's so rewatchable, and I see what you're saying, because I think a lot of people in the beginning they want to make that movie that just blows the doors off hinges, and that's great. And there are those movies out there, but sometimes I'm not necessarily going to watch them over and over. Those movies that you just watch over and over, I'd rather make those. I really would.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people are making a big thing of The Substance recently with its, being nominated for awards, being talked about so much in, I guess, other mainstream avenues that horror is normally not privy to or kind of considered in. Do you think that this will change anything about how the genre is perceived? Or is it just another one of those like flash in the pan and the machine
Uh,
will just go back to the way it always was?
yeah, I kind of have a feeling like the machine is going to do what it's going to do. The Substance. It's a great movie, and I'm really glad to see that it kind of broke out of the genre and was able to get into mainstream a bit. Um, Terrifier 3, the fact that it just like cleaned up at movie theaters. Um, and yet, so what will happen is because of The Substance, because of Terrifier, distribution companies are going to vacuum up a whole bunch of horror content, but then they're going to do exactly what we talked about before. They're just going to dump it out there and then wonder why none of them succeeded like Terrifier, because they're not going to do the thing that Damien Leone and his producers and his distributors Cineverse did to make that a phenomenon project. So I think as a genre, we're gonna keep doing what we've been doing. We get along fine, not being very mainstream. We get along fine doing our thing. Every now and then, a Terrifier or a Substance will come out, and we get our moment, but then it kind of bubbles back down. But I think that's maybe not the worst.
Yeah, I feel like people were getting maybe a little bit too ahead of themselves, thinking the amount of people I talked to recently that seem to think that this is going to create some like different, oh, horror is not going to be the redheaded stepchild anymore because The Substance won awards or because Terrifier or because Long Legs last year made so much money. And I'm like, I still just don't know if that is the case. Why, in your opinion, do you think big time studios and things like that still it's so strange to me because in one sense they use it as like a guarantee for money because they know like with the right idea, with the right marketing, they can make a colossal amount of money for maybe $5-10 million budget. And they have these long lives afterwards and people buy all the t-shirts and the merch and the this and that. You don't get that with comedy movies or romantic comedies or anything like that anymore. Um, why do you think though it's still kind of seen as like the icky, like, no, we don't really want to be?
Yeah, I'm going to use. I'll take. So like, there's a difference between murder and war, right? So like, if I watch a Rambo movie and 50 people get killed, that's one kind of movie. That's one kind of death and violence. If I watch Art the Clown chainsaw 50 people, that's a totally different movie. So it's all still violence, but there is this darker edge to horror that you don't get in action movies, war movies, anything like that. And so I think even no matter how successful any single horror film does, by its nature, it's on the shadow side. It's on the other side of the tree. There's shadows. There's darkness. So I think by its nature, horror is always going to be this fringe edge thing. But I think that's natural and good. I guess that by its nature, it can't be mainstream because
Yeah.
we are still exploring dark things, and the reason I wanted to draw that specific difference between like an action movie or a war movie and a horror movie is it's not just that people are getting killed on screen or whatever. It's there's a darkness to this over to what we do in the horror world versus what you're going to see in a Jason Statham action movie or something. Even though it's still violence, it's still very, very different. So I think, yeah, just by its nature, horror belongs on the other side of the campfire.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I never looked at it like that, but yeah, you're right in the sense of like it's like the same but different.
Yeah, it's in its proper place. That's where you want it.
True. So going forward, then you mentioned earlier about the hoodoos,
Mhm.
and I kind of want to touch on that. I don't know how much you can kind of say or not say, but um, if there is anything that you can say, or maybe in layman's terms, give people a little bit of an idea of what to expect from that. Because instantly, when I seen the name, I was like, okay, that's piqued my interest. And then I seen some of the artwork, and I was like, okay, that's definitely piqued my interest. And then like it's a little bit mysterious, so I've like in my head I've been like making up what I think.
Right.
So I'm interested to see like what actually is in basic terms, what can people expect?
So Hoodoos, it's it's going to be a weird one, but I feel like when you commit as a filmmaker, when you just fully embrace the madness, it creates a bubble in which everybody can be like, "Oh, okay, we're doing this, all right," and then we go for that ride because essentially it's like one part Guy Ritchie uh, heist movie, but it's it's got animated or like we had a lot of puppets. We had Bunraku style voodoo dolls that come to life and kill everybody. So you get you have it's like a heist movie. Then it meets like this kind of twisted toy, demonic toys vibe. Very Charles Band, Full Moon style voodoo dolls that wake up and start killing everybody. So it kind of has this almost like a Scooby Doo feeling, like a really adult Scooby Doo feeling.
That
And
was
it's
the vibe I got instantly. I was like, I don't know why, but it was like, this give me some kind of like Scooby Doo.
oh, absolutely. I mean, to the point that we have, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but we have there's a thing called the Hoodoo HQ that is it's the van that my character lives inside. He's a guy literally living in a van, and he's like a huckster, kind of shitty fortune teller, that gets roped into the scheme. There's like voodoo gangsters, but even to the way we filmed it and the way that we're color grading it, there's a lot. We're using the power of flashlights a lot. Like everything's foggy, so we really dug our heels into the R-rated adult Scooby-Doo vibe. You've got your heist crew, so they're in a van. It's very much got that, and we play it. Like I said, it's a horror comedy, so we play it pretty straight. So we're like, yep, voodoo dolls running around killing people. That's happening.
So looking forward then specifically to that, and then on from that for the rest of we're only at the start of 2025 really. What does the rest of this year look like for you? And I suppose where can people kind of keep up to date or support your work?
Well, what I've got coming up next, the current title is Feral Hymn, and it's essentially a horror western. There's a monster, there's evil clowns, a lot of bear traps, barbed wire, and six shooters. So it's gonna be it's a pretty action packed script. Um, but again, it takes those kind of mishmash, kind of crazy elements and puts them together and plays it really straight. Like, of course, there's a bunch of weirdo clowns living in the swamp, and of course, there's these monsters, and of course, there are bounty hunters that track them and trap them. And here we go. Uh, After that, I'm one of those guys that has 1,000 things in development. So hopefully I'll get that. I've probably got 10 different scripts with different producers. Just waiting for the call. Um, and so right now, this western is the last thing I have that's kind of my own thing. And then after that, we'll see what happens. And as far as keeping up with me and my work, I have a pretty unique name, so you can pretty much type that into any social media platform or search engine, and you'll get somebody who either loves me or hates me. Um, and I'm on most of my work is on most streaming platforms. Um, I'm trying to get better at using social media. I'm 46, so I didn't have that until recently. So it's not necessarily part of my second nature to be online so much. I'm pretty easy to find.
For everybody listening, whether you're looking at the video aspect or on audio platforms, the links to all of Sean's stuff will be down below in the description anyway. So you can, once you're finished this, just go into the description. You'll find all the links to all his social medias, where his work is in different regions and things like that. So final question then before I let you go today is, why horror and what does it mean to you? Like, I suppose it's probably like a double-edged question in a way of, why do you keep going back as both a fan, but then also creatively, what is it that draws you back to maybe the darker aspects of storytelling?
I think it is what I was saying earlier. It is that horror is that genre that's on the other side of the campfire, and I like being tested. As a fan, I like being tested. I like being scared, um, and I think conflict, suffering, hard times, monsters, all that's those are forces that push us as people. They push us as humans. Uh, I mean, you could take that all the way back to like cavemen, lighting fires with spears, and you're looking out into the darkness. I love exploring that as a fan and as a creator. 'Cause for me, that's where the pay dirt is. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Some people are. I think some people are built for it. Some people are built for different genres. But that's always where I want to go. I always want to make it a little darker, a little scarier, a little harder, um, because that's what that pushes us as people. It pushes us as a species. Um, yeah, I mean, I could get all Nick Cage and talk about modern shamanism or whatever, but I really see it as like, no, no, no. As creators and as fans, we go and we sit on the other side of the campfire where the shadows are darker and deeper, and we spend some time there, and then we come back to the other side, and that's I like doing that as a fan, and I like doing that as a creator. It I think it's just what I'm here to do.
And it's for me as well, like, from having all these conversations and talking to so many different people, I just feel like it's the most open sandbox. You can
Yep,
kind of, you can tie it into anything, any feeling, any emotion, anything. Um, and it can be quite I don't know, I think for people maybe outside of it, when they get exposed to it, it's quite like a exhilarating experience to maybe get scared and then kind of laugh about it and not really know how you feel. But then to, after 90 minutes, after 120 minutes, like, survive the experience and come out and go, "Phew,
exactly.
like, I feel really good now." Like, I've like
Yeah. I've experienced the unknown. I've gone to the other side and I've come back, and I'm entertained, but I'm also a little stronger, a little wiser, a little more thankful for what I have. Maybe I learned something. Horror is inherently a growth experience.
yeah, it really is. Sean, this has been a pleasure. I wish you all the best for the upcoming year. I can't wait to see, some of these projects when they come out, and I would definitely love to revisit again at some point
You
if
bet.
you'll have us again.
This was fun. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Like I said, everybody, the links to all of Sean's stuff will be down below in the descriptions, and, yeah, we'll catch you in the next episode.
All right. Y'all be well. Thank you.